Hi there, I'm your host for today, Nick Lines, Product Evangelist at Panaseer, and I'd like to welcome you to this Sparks webinar around ransomware resilience. Today, I'm joined by Charlotte Jupp, the Head of Security Performance Management at Panaseer, and together we're going to be discussing 4 simple steps you can take, or think about taking, to help improve your ransomware resilience. Charlotte, would you please introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Nick. Hi, everyone. Like Nick says, I'm Charlotte. I'm Head of Security Performance Management at Panaseer. And what that means is I work with our customers once they've deployed our product to understand the best metrics and measurements that they should take to secure their environment. We chat about recommendations where we've seen success with other customers, where we've been able to drive process improvements, and how to identify maybe the biggest risks and how to mitigate those. We also look at policies that you should set within your organization and how you can mature those policies with time as your security environment matures, as you grow and as you mature as an organization. So excited to talk about ransomware today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. First of all, a small bit of housekeeping before we move forward. Everyone, please do add your questions in the chat box and we'll try and get round to answer as many as we can. From then, why are we talking about ransomware today, Charlotte?
So I think ransomware it's very high profile. It's one of the biggest threats that faces security leaders today. Partly, I think everyone who's anyone has heard of the ransomware threat, whether you know anything about cybersecurity or not. That means boards, how literate they are within cybersecurity or not. No, that's a big question that they will be challenging their CISOs, their executives within their organizations, is how resilient are we to the threat of ransomware? They don't want to be the next big high profile company in the news that's been breached as a result. But also to mitigate against a ransomware attack, you have to have a lot of controls in place to help you understand your risk. Usually an attacker needs to get lucky once, whereas you need to get lucky all the time to keep them out. There are different stages of an attack. You need controls to monitor against each of those stages. And what we've found and what research tells us is that most ransomware attacks happen as a result of controls being in place and not working properly. So it's not that you didn't have the right mitigation steps there, they just weren't performing as you expected. And that's obviously a challenge then. That's unfortunate because you've tried your best. And despite trying your best, maybe the controls weren't performing as you expected. So that's a different story then to be telling to your boards or to other stakeholders. So yes, big challenge, very hard to do. And so, always happy to offer advice based on what we've seen and to our customers and beyond.
Okay, great. That's interesting that it's people have the tools to protect themselves, but they weren't doing the job they think. So that's not a nice position to be in when you're trying to explain to the board that we actually bought this tool to protect us, but it wasn't working. So moving on from that then, Charlotte, what are we hearing from customers and the market indeed around ransomware?
So again, with our customers they're strongly bought into a concept of continuous controls monitoring. That's why they use our product. So what that means is using automation, using technology to understand firstly what assets connected and sitting on your network. So understanding everything that could be attacked in a ransomware breach, the ways that you could get in, what is on your network, and is everything on your network being protected by the controls that you think they are. So is your endpoint tool over 99% of your environment? Is it over 60% of your environment? Is it over 100%? Obviously striving to achieve the best that you can with the resources that you have. And then when you understand how well covered you are by all your different controls, whether they be privileged access management controls, looking at your users and how well they're performing in their phishing tests, are you testing everyone as you expect and giving them that training that they need? Then are the controls actually performing to the SLAs that you're setting as an organization? Are you within your own risk appetites? Like I said, it might not be feasible to cover all parts of your environment with every part of your control, but are you just in that 1% gap? Are you in that 5% gap? Or are you in a 20% gap? And therefore, are you communicating that message back to your board, what that gap is, and agreeing that that's kind of an accepted state to be in. And where you're not hitting those targets, understanding which ones are the priorities to make sure you're addressing, directing your resource, directing your time and effort to go and make sure that you are closing any gaps, that you are kind of hitting the SLAs that you're striving to reduce and mitigate against your risk of attack from and breach by ransomware.
Cool. I guess that leads nicely then into one of our first steps, which is using control data to understand exposure and recovery status actually for ransomware.
Yeah. And what we do when we speak with our customers in the market is we think there are kind of three key stages really in a ransomware attack. That tends to be infiltrate, so how the attacker is going to get into your environment. Once they are in, how they can propagate through your environment. And then if they're able to propagate, kind of what they will exploit and how you can potentially recover or not from any breach that's occurred. So if we look at all of those individually, so infiltrate is usually your external network. How are they getting in? So that could be through your people, through clicking on links. It could be, it's very hard to make sure that everyone's not clicking all the time. So then in terms of like, if they were to click, what other controls are there to prevent that being an impact? So looking at your external network, do you have any other exploitable vulnerabilities that are sitting on your external network? Do you have endpoint coverage over all of your externally facing devices so that you can understand if a breach is starting to take place and also try and protect against that? It's then, if that were to occur, if someone were to get in, how are they able to propagate about? Now, one of the key ways that this can happen is if you don't have principles of least privilege deployed. Do you have local admin rights on devices where you didn't expect them, meaning that someone can use those to start jumping around and kind of jumping between infrastructure in your environment? Do you actually have all the controls in place on your internal environment, such as EDR tools, to understand if that threat is propagating, and then to try and block it through those tools if you can? And then let's say that that's all happened and they're exploiting. How do you recover from this? Do you have backups of your business critical devices? Do you understand what your business critical devices are to be able to back them up? Are those backups sitting on segmented networks so that they're perhaps protected from what an attacker might have already got access to, so that you can recover quickly, so that at least you can start your business back up and running again, so that you're not locked down? These are all different kind of stages of the attack that all have different controls in place across a breadth of security domains to help you need to mitigate against that risk. As I said, having all of those controls then in place, you're probably not going to have complete protection within each of those controls as you would hope. So understanding which are the key priorities for us as a business, which are the ones that we should prioritize and address first, and being able to communicate that message to others, usually from a business perspective, to help them understand the impact and therefore why you should prioritize some of those controls over others, is something that's really key, so everyone together can understand the risk that's being accepted and where it is that you really need to kind of focus your attention to lower that mitigation, lower the risk as much as you can.
That's fascinating, Charlotte. Thank you. It sounds like what you're saying then is you've got to have some form of context and prioritization in order to make the calls that you need to make, because we don't simply have infinite resources to fix everything immediately, or have this nirvana which doesn't actually exist in reality.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So through the number of people you have in your team, the resources, the budget that you have allocated, security teams don't have the capacity to fix everything. So what should they fix first to make the biggest impact? And we find that's usually driven by business context. So understanding what are the most business critical parts of your environment that you need to protect above all costs. That could be your external network. It could be your business critical devices that support your business critical applications that you need for your business to operate. There are lots of different things there, and we help our customers understand how to look for and prioritize those parts of their infrastructure.
So that prioritization is really step number 2 then.
Yeah, I would say it is. So that's what we always find, is adding that business context. This is hard for organizations to do because usually lots of different disparate siloed systems hold different parts of information about this. It could be that your IP ranges tell you where your external network is, but then it's your application inventory that tells you where your most business critical applications are. And how does that relate then to the devices that support them? So mapping that to understanding a device is business critical because it supports a business critical, or it could be that this device is owned by our CEO. Our CEO is high profile and therefore could be high profile for a ransomware or phishing attack. Through those means. So protecting and making sure the controls on those devices are operating as best they can to protect kind of the route into the organization. So doing that is hard unless you have automation in place. Joining all of that data together if you do it manually, our customers have told us before they used our product, doing that was a very manual task. It takes a lot of time. And by the time you get to report and present that information to someone, the data naturally will be out of date because it's taken you that time to bring it together from the source systems. So you're always kind of playing catch up then to what the true status is. So the only real way you can bring in that business context and have immediate prioritization is through automation and joining that data on a daily basis to understand your up-to-date status.
Fantastic. So moving on to step number 3 then, Charlotte. This is around, in my view, this is around enforcing policy adherence across the totality of the ransomware attack kill chain. You've described that infiltrate, propagate, and then exploit or exfiltrate. This relates to the above points in some way, but I guess it's also underpinned by a sense of visibility and prioritization. I mean, every organization has relevant policies in place, but as we know, enforcing those policies can be a time-consuming and a manual task. What you really need is the right visibility so you can then measure your performance against those policies.
Yes, that's correct. So understand and measure your performance against those policies, and then look, once you understand that, to obviously reduce the risk against those policies. And once you've done that, to probably make your policies stricter on yourselves to try and reduce your risk surface or your risk appetite. So as an example, what I'd say is if you were starting on your cybersecurity journey as an organization, if you know and appreciate that you have maybe kind of fewer controls in place, you're starting out, you're looking and knowing what to measure, try and get something up and running and get going. So it would be maybe vulnerabilities. Let's patch all vulnerabilities that we see, maybe severity 5 vulnerabilities within 14 days. Now, as you mature, and like I mentioned before, understand maybe how you can relate to your devices to the business risk that they might carry. You might say, well, actually, let's try and patch all our severity 5 vulnerabilities on the external network or on a business critical device that's hosting a business critical application within 3 days, and then other severity 5s within maybe 7 days, and looking to break it down like that so that you are becoming more and more risk averse and protecting the key things first. With one customer we work with, they went through a process like that and actually understood through doing analysis that they had some process improvements that they could make. So they identified maybe that they had a standard build image problem through looking at metrics and analysis and understanding the SLAs. They noticed that old vulnerabilities that they'd patched previously and done campaigns for were coming back into their environment. And how was that happening? Because they'd had targeted efforts to address these through some of the policies they were setting. And it was because the standard build image hadn't been patched. Every time new devices were being spun up, the old vulnerabilities were being reintroduced. Through noticing that and patching the image, they managed to get rid of a lot of the noise in their environment. And then they realized that actually they could be tougher on themselves and set stricter policies. So then they could actually try to meet a tighter SLA because there wasn't all this other noise in the background, which meant that they were increasing their maturity, they were increasing or decreasing their risk appetite in these instances. And those are all the areas that we're looking to help customers with, to understand where they can find those processes upstream to fix, rather than keeping on fixing the downstream processes. And as you do this, like I said, you should always be looking to get started with some policies and then looking to mature those policies as you start to hit those and the targets that you're setting. Whereas good was good enough before, what's good next time?
Indeed, because yes, the one thing about cybersecurity is it's never ending, isn't it? So agreed, policies absolutely need to evolve. And it sounds like what you're saying is you need the measurement or automated measurement to have the data so you know what to evolve to become better, not just say, hey, we've done ransomware resilience, it's all fixed now.
Correct. And being able to see that, and I think automation so that you can see it day on day. If you were to just do a monthly analysis like the customer I mentioned, you'd miss that opportunity to understand when peaks were suddenly occurring, when these vulnerabilities were reintroduced. Looking day on day, you can understand, we spun up however many devices on that day. That was this instance occurred here, and this is when we did this. And it allows you to start bringing in that context of what might have happened in your environment for this kind of sudden change or breach of threshold, maybe in some of the SLAs that you were seeing. And by having that context again from day on day and understanding a trend and understanding where a peak might occur allows you to identify the issues and the reasons so that you can fix them upstream, as opposed to if you were only looking at that data once a month, it might just seem that you have a steady number once a month, and how that number's come to be steady, it's harder to determine. But day on day analysis allows you to see those trends and allows you to see where and how to address those issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. That does make me think. There was a recent report from Mandiant, their M-Trends reports for 2022, that noted that the average dwell time for ransomware, so the average time before something happens, was 9 days. So that is a very short period of time to actually do something. And if you're only looking at things monthly, agreed, that's going to catch you out.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So then on to our final step. And I think this is really very relevant to what we were discussing earlier around reporting needs. If you need to take further action to improve ransomware resilience, you're going to need board level engagement and validation. And I know you mentioned that the board are likely to be asking questions around ransomware. I think what we need to do is almost preempt those questions. And for those who are on the front line, they need to be able to actively engage and interact with the board members to make sure that they are driving the narrative, if you like, or keeping the board informed so they don't end up the board doesn't feel they have to ask questions. They feel informed, they feel comfortable.
Yes, and what I'd say is, and we touched on this near the start, is that traditionally, and not with everyone obviously, is that board members don't necessarily have the highest level of cybersecurity knowledge. You wouldn't necessarily expect them to. The reason they are on the board of that company generally is because of how they can really drive the business forward and the business impact they can make in terms of what the business initiatives are that company wants to do. So what we found is working with CISOs and others who present to the board is helping them understand the risk from the business impact perspective. So if you can start translating the security or the technical risk to how it might impact the business, so whether it be ransomware or anything else, like we talked about, breaking down those stages of an attack. So it's not just we're talking about endpoint controls, we're not just talking about privileged access management. Why are those metrics important? What parts of the attack do they relate to? What does that mean? What would that mean in terms of the business impact? Does it mean that if you're a bank, your trading servers go down and you can no longer trade? And if we don't have the backups, it would take us X number of days to recover. And obviously, then your market position, you're not able to trade, you're not able to respond. The board members start to understand that it's not just, we have this exploitable vulnerability on this server. It's changing it to that business impact conversation. And having dashboards that explain that, having dashboards that explain all the risks that sit there, and allowing the board to understand those that we think are priorities to mitigate, those that we might have to accept, or those that we are choosing to accept because we don't have the budget to direct in that, allows you to open those conversations and allows the board to be able to really understand, actually, do we want to direct more resource, more money into these areas, or are we going in with our eyes wide open to understand that this is a risk that we will have to kind of accept in this instance, but to be done from that full understanding of what the situation is from all parties' perspectives.
Perfect. And I think that's the ideal note to end on, really, because that's summarizing everything nicely. But if we briefly recap, there's 4 things we've gone through 4 things you can consider doing to improve your ransomware resilience. They're all interlinked, and that's because they're all fundamentally underpinned by a sense of visibility. You can't improve and protect what you're not aware of, and then you've got to measure to see how you're actually doing once you've got that visibility.
Yeah, that's correct. So like we said, what is connecting to your environment, whether it be a device, an application, a person, how are they connecting? What accounts are they using? It's so important to understand all of those things that are entities, assets that are part of your environment so that you can protect them. So visibility is really important. And then enforcement of the controls on those assets to protect them as best you can is also super important.
Cool. So I guess to summarize then, if you take anything away from this discussion, think about how you can bring these 4 things we've been discussing into your current processes, your current ways of working it. And I know this sounds a bit daunting at first, but it's all about making sure you've got the right tools, the right processes, the right people in the place, and really the right platform to support this. With something like continuous controls monitoring platform in place, you can start off creating, customers get a load of value, I think, what you're saying, from having that single trusted asset inventory, making sure you've got everything aggregated in one place, as you were discussing, actually, Charlotte. And from there, you need to move on to that prioritization point, then the measuring and metrics to ensure everything's in place.
Yes, definitely. So we would advocate for visibility, enforcement of metrics and policies, prioritization when you understand what issues you have and what to address, and then being able to engage and communicate about that back to other members of your business, whether that be the board or whether it be kind of the members of your teams who you need to help them know what issues to address first, and making it really clear for them how they can have the biggest impact within the team to secure your organization.
Wonderful. And at that point, I think we close the webinar. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much.